I appreciate being asked to be here tonight, and hopefully I can get through this with very few little snags of the technical side. But what I'd like to go through is I have been taking notes with different patients and clients. I'm a psychologist working primarily with adolescents, children, adolescents, young adults, and just what they've been going through over this last year with COVID, actually over the last year. And in listening to their stories, I would ask them how they did with the start of COVID, the middle of COVID, as far as over the summer, and then getting back to school this year, how that's been for them. And then going from 2 days a week or all online, the e-learning, to 4 days a week to 5 days a week. And it's been very interesting. So it really got me thinking about what is all going on. And to be honest, there have been a variety of answers, concerns, problems, ways that our youth have handled this last year. I would say majority amazing. I've never seen such resiliency, probably better in a lot of our youth than us adults in trying to go with these changes. So my plan for tonight is to go through a little bit of child development and understanding the intellectual, emotional, physical growth of a child, adolescent. And so we're talking 0 to 18. And looking at what do we look at for development? What's important for a child and adolescent? So when I keep using the word child, just keep it in mind that I'm talking all ages. And how is that different from the way that we're looking at the last year, especially the last year? But you can take everything that I'm saying tonight and you can apply it to all portions of your child's life in a way to think differently and handling them through the different phases in life. They're all individuals, and childhood, adolescence, young adult, those are just phases. Those are different time periods in the life of an individual, as well as being an adult. So in talking about this, first I'd like to just, the definition of a child is a young person, especially between infancy and puberty. We're going 0 to a senior in high school, so that could be 17 or 18. The definition of development, and these are just real basic, but I found this one very interesting because it's the act or the process or result of developing. So you can think of developing new ideas and interesting development. So when you think of a child and their development, they're in the act or the process of this or result of developing. Then it's in the state of being developed, like a project. They are a project. They are going to develop over time. It's not going to be just a one day, one and done, or oh, at this age, they're going to be completed. This is a lifelong process. The third one that I find interesting is a tract of land that has been made available or usable, such as a developed tract of land, especially one with houses built on it. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, that has nothing to do with this. But if we think of our child being born into the world, and they are like this piece of land or this foundation, we want to keep building upon it, and they will keep developing and growing into something so much more. So in my past earlier years, one of my degrees is in early childhood, child development and family relations. And in that process, I was able to be certified as a nursery school or preschool teacher in the course. One of the things that was drilled into our head for working with these small children under the age of kindergarten was that we had to write goals that met their 3 domains. And the 3 domains are looking at their cognitive growth, and I'll go through these in a minute, their emotional social growth, and their physical growth. And every single thing that you wrote as far as an activity, you had to try to find a way that you met those 3 areas. So cognitive is relating to or believe or being involved in your conscious intellectual activity, such as thinking, reasoning, or remembering. Basically, it's thinking about how you think. Then we have emotional. And so keep this in mind with your child, especially if you have a 3-year-old right now or an adolescent. This will all be relatable. But first, emotional is defined as relating to emotion, understanding emotions, being dominated or prone to emotion. Again, think of your 3-year-old. and how they dominate you with their emotions. Appealing to or arousing emotions. Think of your teenager and those arousing emotions that get going. And many of those emotions can come out at one time, trust me. Then there's the markedly aroused or agitated in feeling. And this is empathy and sympathy, that you can actually have emotions for someone else. And so it's like reciprocal relationships. Sometimes you can identify empathetically with someone and say, I've been there, I get it. Other times you don't really understand, but you sympathize with them. And so then the third one, or the one that goes with social, is social emotional, is the social side. So in teaching, again, these three areas, these three domains, we're looking at involving allies. How do we start to make and connect with others? Marked by or past and pleasant companionship with friends or associates. When we get our children, we want them to learn to be social. Relating to or designed for social ability. We don't just want them to be social, but to understand how to be social and socialize with others. Relating to human society, the interactions of individuals and the group or the welfare of human beings or members of society. We want, again, those reciprocal relationships, that it's a give and take, that we all bring something to the table. We want them to form cooperative and interdependent relationships, not just independent or dependent, but again, that we work together with others. Also learning how to be in social situations. I know many of you probably have children that have a lot of social anxiety, and COVID has not been helpful for that whatsoever. And we'll talk more about that, but those are all these skills that are supposed to be developing in like those first 5 years of life. Those are big goals for kindergartners, and those are going to be the years that we see the most growth. You'll be able to identify from birth to 5, you'll be like, whoa, it's the fastest growing time for any individual. It does not stop. We continue to grow, but just in different, it's a slower process and in different ways, and a lot of them are not as observable. The third area of those domains is physical. Now, this is physical growth. So again, think of your little ones. We grow in 2 ways. Cephalocaudal, which is head to tail, meaning as we grow, and if you have seen any babies and toddlers, they have very large heads, and their heads are much bigger than those little bodies. And when they get walking and that head gets ahead of them, you know what's going to happen. Also proximal distal, which we grow from in to out. So we can do bigger movements, and our fine movements in our fingers, the smaller things that we can do, those are going to come later in development. We have, again, fine motors and gross motor fall along that line. So understanding how a child grows is really important when we're looking at those years. Now, if we go a little bit further, we're going to see that there's 6 areas of learning throughout our childhood and adolescence. We already talked about the personal or the social emotional development, the communication, language, and literacy. That all goes with that cognitive. Now, you always ask, why do I have to do math every year, all through grade school, junior high, and high school? Mathematical development is something that is an area of learning that needs to be provided throughout all those years. It's a critical form of development. Knowledge and understanding of the world. We talked about physical development. And then there's creative development. It is so important to foster that creative development in learning with our children and our adolescents. So as I said, each area could grow at different rates. Sometimes you got that kid that your kid is the biggest one in class, and boy, physically he can outplay or she can out dance any other student there. They've got this athletic ability. And then you've got the other kid that's a tiny little kid, but boy, can they read at all sorts of levels. Eventually those start to even out. And it may be we grow in one area, and then later we catch up with another area. So as you watch that and look back at your kids or your kids currently, you'll see where they excel, and then they kind of plateau there and the other areas catch up. Where does the support for all this development come from? They're going to develop one way or another, but how do we support it? Well, first of all, we have nature versus nurture. We had our DNA. Nature, I mean, there's going to be the genetics from parents that's going to manifest out, but also personality comes from there. And personality, if we define that, that is the complex characteristics that distinguish each individual. Especially, it's the totality of the individual's behavior and emotional characteristics. So we're all different, yet we're the same in so many ways. So we have nature. You know, you're born a certain way, there's certain things you're coming with. But then we have nurture. And nurture has to do with our environment. And we have so many sources for that add to the development of our children. What one environment can't give, another one will pick up. So we have families, we have extended families. We have those families that, you know, you call Aunt Cindy, and not really an aunt, but a really good friend. And, you know, we've adopted them into our family. We have our schools, we have our community. So all of these different environments play together to help these children grow and develop. So with that little short, seminar on child development, we look at, so what's happened over the last year, more than a year, with this COVID to our children's development. Well, this is where I said it's really varied. But if we look at a year of development or a year of all those different areas in a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old, where all of that grows so fast, and then we compare it to someone that's 13, 14, what did that 1 year do for these kids? And like I said, we have a wide variety. I always tell every kid that I'm seeing, or child, adolescent, even adults, we were all in the exact same storm, okay, across the world. However, we were all in very different boats. And some of us were sitting, you know, well, if you watch reality TV, we were sitting in our yachts, but we were quarantined, you know, having it rough. But then most of us, we were in boats that were maybe comfortable. Maybe we were in a pontoon and had all of our family together, and we were about ready to jump over by the end. But we were very close. Maybe we were in a canoe. We were above water, not overly stable, but it's all we had. Some of us might have been in a little tugboat, and we were bailing out the water faster, or trying to be faster than the water that was coming in with a hole in it. No one knows what kind of boat each person was in. And so we had our own journey and our own stories. Within our family, we may have felt, as the adults, that we kept our family together. We were in a nice sized boat through this storm, and we were pretty strong and powerful, but not realizing that our child or our children, each one was in their own little boat in a different way, and what they were experiencing. So we can't really put in, you know, say, oh, you don't have it so bad, or this person could have it worse. Well, thank goodness of this or that. Because we all have our own journey of what we feel is important, or what we missed out on, or what has been hard. So 4 factors to consider when we're looking at kids and our teenagers is they definitely have very different experiences than an adult. So one of my questions to you, to all of you, is what was the age of the last person to live through a global pandemic? Okay, since you guys are not really going to answer me, I will answer and tell you. They would be 103. And I hope they have a really good memory from when they were an infant, because they would have just been born. 1918 was the influenza pandemic. And this was the last most severe global pandemic. Now, this may sound a little familiar. In the United States, it was first identified in the military personnel in the spring of 1918. Estimated about 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population, became infected with this virus. The number of deaths was estimated to be at least 50 million worldwide, with about 675,000 occurring in the US. Wow, kind of sounds a little familiar here. So, like I said, that was 103 years ago. So none of us have experienced this in our lifetime. And what's even more important is no one has experienced this besides our kids as a child or a teen or an adolescent young adult. We have no clue what it's like to have your life altered. Now, I know we have the Gen X and the millennials, and all these and the boomers, and we got all of us categorized. But the fact is, this is the first that each of these ages, including our own, is experiencing this. On top of that, not only do we have the pandemic, but we have this political uproar. We had violence and rioting taken to our streets within our communities, in our nation. We have had friends and family so divided in their values, their beliefs, their attitudes. What is the meaning of justice, as well as people feeling just unsafe, that the world they knew is now not very safe. Can you imagine being a fourth grader and aware of these things and not taking some of it on, or younger or older? Our kids are experiencing and hearing things more than we probably ever would have given them. There's many things that go on in our life as parents that we're like, well, let's just, they don't need to worry about this. This isn't their burden. There's enough life stressors, but this is one that's right in their face. And you can't do anything about it. I can't do anything about it. They're going to hear about it. We have little kids wearing masks. That is unbelievable how well they have done that, regardless what anyone's beliefs are. That's what the rules were. And these kids are fantastic. Even, when I see them, it's pretty cool to see just how that's a sign of that resilience. They just know that's what we need to do. So the second factor I want you to think about is measurement of time and significance in a child's life. We do not measure things the same way children do. They measure through special events, moments, things they look forward to: birthdays, holidays, vacations, graduation from kindergarten, huge accomplishment, graduation from high school, fourth grade field trip to Madison and the Capitol, and you get to go to the ice cream place that I don't think is there anymore, but we have parents that remember that have now raised their children, that's a big event. The Boston School Forest every year, waiting to be the next year because whatever the activity is, because they're always the same. You're getting your driver's license, turning 18. We have so many events that we mark as a child that is like a rite of passage, that these are the things that we measure our accomplishments by, that we measure our value, that we have our ups and our downs, our ebbs and our flows, and we have life lessons through these things. Our relationships with friends, they come, they go. So now think of as an adult. Okay, I'm going to say you are already graduated, you've already turned 21, you are married, you have a couple of children, and you have your career in place, or your income, you're set. What other things besides some occasional family weddings, or unfortunately funerals, or your kids' birthdays, what do we as adults really measure in our life for the next big thing? Not a lot. Time passes us by. But kids measure in those events of knowing how much time has passed, or what experiences are at what ages. So not having a lot of those over the last year, there were a lot of losses. There were things that were a one time and done that they don't get to go back and do because of just the way the world was and what was going on. It was of no fault of anybody's. Everyone did what they needed to do. We had family changes that were going on that altered lifestyles immensely. And these are things that kids they hear about, but they may not really get it. And that brings me to my third factor is no, they do not take into account that others have it worse, that they should feel lucky to be alive. It's in their development right now not to get it. They're worried about themselves. This is their time. They're developing so quickly. Each phase is different. It's not that your child can't have empathy or can't feel bad. Many will even have anxiety over a lot of these situations because they don't understand it, and the people that are their caretakers, their parents, can't give them answers. It's just this kind of almost an ominous feeling out there, that of dread and not really sure when it's going to end. They have different things that are important to them and their losses. And what is a loss to them as adults, and we've all been through this, where our child is broke a shoelace on their favorite shoes and it becomes the biggest issue under the sun, and we're like, okay, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal for whatever reason, but in their life at that moment. So it's really hard. And one of the things that kids will say to me, and teenagers, is I feel bad or feeling bad about something I've lost because I know other people have it worse and I should be grateful. That's a lot of guilt they put on themselves. The fourth, I thought I had four, but I think I had three. Let me check one more. So 3 factors there. So here are some things that I've seen over the last year and what I've been told by students. So the initial fear and anxiety of COVID, which there are many children that were traumatized. At first, it was like, oh, what is this thing? And oh, great, I get another week of spring break. This is great. Suddenly it became very real, and it became very real to everyone when suddenly we're quarantined in our homes and we're not going to go anywhere. If you went out at all, it was like a ghost town. It was very scary. And again, there were a lot of unknowns. That, for the most part, many said it decreased once they hit the summer. They missed out on things, and a lot of trips were canceled, and loss of sports. So there were things like that, but they weren't as fearful. They were actually getting a little bit more used to, okay, places I don't go, I can only be within my bubble of people. It settled down some, but then when school started back, we're back to the unknown. We get through part of the summer and we're waiting to find out what's going on with school, and school is trying to figure out what school's going to do. Everyone is doing the best they can. Get into school, that caused a lot of anxiety for a number of kids, especially the 2 days a week and then the e-learning. And then, that Wednesday off and getting into that routine. E-learning was really it was a unique experience. One, for the teachers having to figure out how to do e-learning when was not the norm. But there are kids that thrived with e-learning, that they found that was a great way for them to learn. There were kids that failed with e-learning, that this caused so much anxiety because they needed the structure of the school. Good, bad, whatever, it is what it is. But you also, if kids were learning better with the e-learning or felt more comfortable, we also started seeing a lot more that became their norm. And the idea of going back to school was very anxiety provoking. These kids had they had the ability to say if they were going to do e-learning all week or go with the 2 days. There was a lot of up and down, and then suddenly we changed and we got all e-learning till after the first of the year. And then we have some changes again. And there was again the fear now going back 4 days. Oh my gosh, these kids, you would have thought they never experienced 4 days of school in their life. And I would say to them, I'd say, okay, let's say they were a junior. I'm like, you have had kindergarten plus 10 years, of going to school 5 days a week for 9 months out of the year, basically from 8 to 3 or 9 to 3:30. For how many years? And you suddenly forgot what that's like? But they did. It was not I could joke with them, but the fact is it truly, the deficits and what was lost from being out of that consistency over that year, we had a lot of loss, a lot of not just only increase in anxiety, but lack of empathy. They had a lot of apathy, that didn't care, motivation was gone. Kids were isolating so much from this, they didn't really want to get back into the group of some of this. And again, various reasons. The feeling of isolation and loneliness. Some children expressed to me, now I had a young one, like 6th grade, express about I don't really know what my purpose is. Now, it was not a self-harming, suicidal depression. It was a true lost feeling of, I don't really know what is my purpose. I go to school or I do my e-learning and I'm home. The next day, it's just going back and forth. And it was just such this, there was a sadness. It wasn't depressed. It was just disheartened. Didn't really know where to go with it. I had a high school student say they were uncomfortable every day with their life. Just every day felt uncomfortable. And again, it wasn't to an extreme on this case, but it was just that state of being kind of in a state of limbo and feeling so uncomfortable. Many were feeling a constant state of ambivalence. They wanted to see their friends, but there was a fear of seeing their friends. They wanted to go to school, but there was a fear of going to school. They didn't know where they wanted to be, and that ambivalence is a horrible feeling. We call it cognitive dissonance, when your mind is telling you one thing, or your intellect is saying, okay, this is good, and your emotions are saying something else, and you're fighting with yourself. That can be with two thoughts. It can be with two emotions. It's a tough time. Now let's also put in that you have a child going through adolescence and puberty and the state of ambivalence. There is another perfect storm there. Some express feelings of a constant state of hypervigilant, being oversensitive to their environments, constantly like looking over their shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop, just always in that heightened state. And when we're in a heightened state like that, we are in, that state of fight or flight or freeze. And at any moment, one of those things can get set off. Some were very discouraged and disheartened at the loss of the education they had over the last year. There are a number of students that had done very well, even fourth quarter. And the minute when they got the plus, the pass plus or the pass or the fail, that discouraged them of what was all my work for. Over this last year of the hybrid of the e-learning and then the days off and then going to 2 days, they felt like they weren't getting what they needed. Again, no fault, except it was just what all the factors were. There are students that I found that really, they found, and when we talk a little more with resilience, but there was a real learning life lesson with this whole process. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Others who had been top students were failing with the online schooling because of the lack of structure. And that failure caused a number of them to fall into a pretty deep depression. We've had a very large increase, a significant increase in depression and feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, leading to thoughts and feelings of suicide over this last year, an increase more than what we've seen in the past. Feeling they have missed out on things, that they could have had some type of recognition or acknowledgement, such as homecoming, week, sports, graduation. Many felt like school, all the focus was on academics. And for many students, school is not just academics. When we go back to that whole development, child development I was talking about, there are so many areas that are developed by a child going to school or having some social interactions along with their academics. For many, the idea of getting an A or getting 100%, and it's fine. But going and seeing that person that walks out of their classroom fifth hour and get a glance at them and going and giggling off and being all excited, or someone telling you about some new event or getting invited to something, that was a bigger deal than 100% on a test at times. Many of these kids sat and all they did was do their work and kept looking at their grades and worrying about their grades. They didn't even have their sports for their outlets there. So they also were really missing out on the social reinforcement of human interaction, the connections, even with their teachers and the other staff. Many kids, as when I talked about, we have more than one environment, their families are great, but families were also going through a lot of changes. Many families, with employment and childcare and trying to make all this work, it was tough. We forget that the teachers also had the same tough, they had families and lives as well. But there are many students that their mentor is a teacher at school, or maybe it's a staff person that just says hi to them, checks in with them. Those were really important, experiences that they were missing. So some of the things that also, and I touched on a little bit is a lot of grief, a lot of loss of small traumas. We call them small T's. There's large T's, large traumas that we've all experienced when we've lost loss of a loved one, being in an accident, having something traumatic go on. But then there's the small T's, and these are all a lot more personal. Often others don't realize. But the loss of some of the things that I talked about, those were little T's that kept adding up. And so for some of these kids, anxiety, depression start to set in because you get enough little T's all the time. You start to kind of break down your level of resilience. Then let's talk about some of those families that went through big traumas on top of little traumas that were going on. It's a lot to handle. Increase in mental health issues. Those that have been diagnosed and struggle with anxiety and depression, this was not helpful. This was very difficult on them. There were many, though, that being able to be home and not have to go out and be anxious at school and deal with some issues, that was helpful to them. But again, it also caused some learned helplessness. And I saw many that became their new normal. Executive functioning. So this is really important. And I think if you think about this throughout your child's life and even your own life, so all of us have what we call the primitive brain, and then we have the higher functioning brain. So all species have a primitive brain, which regulates our basic functions: eating, sleeping, walking, balance, hunger, thirst, movement, hearing, sight, all of those things. Then as humans, we have our frontal lobe. Our frontal lobe is much larger than other species, and that allows for executive functioning. Thinking, rationale, problem solving, the appropriate emotion to the situation, reading social cues, social skills, intellectual ability. Well, that's great. But if we are anxious or we can't regulate our emotions, that primitive brain also regulates emotions and the information coming in. It's the relay center. It tells the rest of the body what to do. It overrides executive functioning. So if you have a child that gets anxious, there's a certain level of anxiety you can get and you're still thinking and you can work with them. And many of you know if that anxiety goes over that threshold, executive functioning goes off, primitive brain triggers on, and we go into fight, flight, or freeze. So you think about it, if your child's in that state, it's kind of, let's think of a rabbit, and let's say you have a dog. We have a dog and we also have rabbits that come around our yard. When our dog sees that rabbit, pretty excited, that rabbit will either freeze, I'm not here, you don't see me, or they will fly and they are going to get out of there as quick as they can. They are not going to fight the dog. They are not going to be like, okay, come here, buddy, I got you. So they're going to go with what's going to work for them. Think about this with your kids. You know, that rabbit did not click into the executive functioning and go, what would be the best way to handle this? And take time to really weigh out the pros and cons of what to do with this dog. Just reacts, none of that. So our kids do that too when they get overloaded and their emotions go over that threshold. They may fight. So you've got a child that suddenly they're more aggressive, or there are issues in school because they feel like they got backed into a corner, or you're seeing this behavior at home, or they flee, they avoid, they isolate, or they just mentally close down, or they freeze. And they just don't know what to do. They are almost paralyzed. So keeping that in mind when you see those kind of things, that is that emotional dysregulation. And remember that development is one of the things that we look at, and we're working with kids on learning how to manage. The other thing to talk about is learning habits. So I tell students 3-3-3, the kids I work with. So 3 days to break any kind of urge. So if you're trying to start something, stop something, you got to get to day 4. So if you're going to make a new habit, you got to try to do, okay, 3 days. Let's take, for example, not sitting on their bed doing their homework, but sitting actually by a kitchen table. I know it's the worst fight there is. But the first day, oh my gosh, they're going to be sliding off the chair. They're going to be upset, throwing a fit. Second day, fine, I'll do this. Third day is about the worst, actually. And that is like, I cannot get through this. But can we get to the fourth day? All right, we got it. 3 weeks then to make that a habit. After 3 weeks, okay, kind of got this down. 3 months to see a change. So you can apply that to pretty much anything in our lives, and adults as well. But when you're working with your kids, think of, let's get through 3 days. Let's get to day 4, and then let's see where we go from there, and try to keep always building on that. But if we look at the last year and a half or so, if we take from spring break to current, we have not had, well, sometimes we haven't even had 3 weeks to make a habit. And if we did get to 3 weeks, within 3 months, we had a change. And their schedules were changed again, or their routines were changed again. So when we talk about they really don't want to go back to school, or they have an anxiety about going to school, that's because their last year, over a year, has been consistently inconsistent. It's been predictably unpredictable. And what happens when you get those is you start to breed a couple things: hopelessness, learned helplessness, contentment, it is what it is, isolation and withdrawing, or you can get resilience. And that's what we're seeing. There's a whole wide variety. And resilience, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that resilience and what can you do as a parent or someone that is providing support. So resilience is the ability of something to return to its original size and shape after being compressed or deformed. Well, if that isn't the definition of what has gone on with our kids in the last year, I don't know what is. Even though it's like, is that really it? Yeah, they have been molded and changed and pushed and pulled in ways that they didn't expect. That the few things they had control over, they didn't have control over. And again, as adults, yeah, we went through a lot of that as well. But looking through their eyes. The other definition is an ability to recover from or adjust easily to adversity or change, which fits, even better than the first one. But I like the analogy of how that first one comes out. So how do we build resilience with our kids? So these strategies that I'm going to give you, they can be used in many situations, not just the current. The first thing that I always teach is I could have the most anxious child in here, and seeing an anxious child. As parents, we have to learn to support, not save. Many times we do not want to see our child or children uncomfortable. And so we want to help them get through as quickly as we can, or we want to put things in to help them. And that can even be a child that's doing something more on the negative side, that let's just fix it and move on. But we want to support them through it so they know that they have the resilience. They can get through anything, and you will be behind them with your hands up. So if they fall, you will be catching them with your hands out. But they can go through anything. One of the things that I always work with kids on is taking responsibility, own it, hold yourself accountable, and you will earn respect, not just for yourself or by others, but also you for yourself. And one of the ways that we do that as parents is saying, okay, you can do this. You have to own what's gone on, figure out a plan, and I will be there to support you through it. I can't do it, but I will support you. If we are always saving our children, we are breeding helplessness. We keep them a victim, and we keep them in that state of fight or flight. When they're anxious, they will learn that their anxiety gets lessened by someone else. Now, how well is that going to work when that somebody else isn't always with them? We want to teach them that they are strong. Validate their feelings, not their behavior. Talking with kids on a regular basis, I always tell them when they start acting out, or if it's emotionally and they're so distraught, or if it's behaviorally, I say, you have a lot to say about your feelings and stuff, but I can't hear you because your behavior gets in the way. And I bet that happens at home. So they want to be heard. And a lot of times when you don't validate their feelings, that doesn't mean you agree with them, but you validate that you've heard them. it decreases a lot of behavior. Not feeling validated or heard will often increase that behavior to the negative, because I'm going to make sure you see me. And so being able to say, I can tell you're very uncomfortable by this, or I can see that this causes you a lot of anxiety. I'm sorry that you seem very angry about this. Now I know some of you are like, okay, it sounds a little patronizing, but truly, if you just say, I heard you, I know you're angry about this. Sometimes that's all the more it takes. Empathize and sympathize. So empathy is, I get it, I've been there. Sympathizing is, I don't really understand maybe what you're going through, but I can feel that this causes you a lot of pain, because you don't know what it's like to be a child going through this right now. Do you know what it's like to be a teenager going through, grade school, junior high, high school, or high school as a teenager? Absolutely. But every single child will tell you it is very different, and you are way old and you don't know anything. So just smile and walk away on that one. Monitor the changes in behavior. So one of the things I want you to look at is before, during, and after COVID. I know we're in the midst of not really after, but think about your child prior to COVID, and then look at during, what changes did you see? And as things lessen and they're getting back into some routine or normalcy, are you seeing a decrease in that? I've had a lot of parents concerned and kids concerned with they have ADHD because they can't focus and concentrate. There's a thing called state dependent learning. And if you're going to be in an environment that isn't conducive to your learning, when you go and you all once get into that environment, you're going to have no clue. So when kids are getting up and they're trying to do their work, laying on their bed, they're not in the right mode. Even if they go and they sit at a desk in their room, or they've got music on, or they've changed up the environment, or they're trying to do e-learning and it's not in a classroom. I don't know if any of us can focus that well. For all of you that are working from home, what a change that is. How have you made that work? I could do virtual appointments. I could not do them from home. Every day of quarantine and after quarantine, when we could go back to work, I have to be in my office. Cannot do it because I live by, I'm a creature of habit. And so, yeah, this was a whole different way of learning. Of course, these kids are going to look like they can't focus and concentrate. So think of before, was this truly an issue? And are things getting a little better now that they're back in school? I know that one of the things that has been quite, has been commented on is, why would the school system put these kids back into school 5 days a week with a couple days left? If we think about habits, or you think about memory, or you think about learning, the last thing you did is going to be the first thing you remember. And so getting back into what it feels like. We have muscle memory. We have muscle memory throughout our whole body. Getting back into the feeling of sitting at a desk and going to classes 5 days a week, even for a few weeks. 3 weeks to make a habit, but that getting back that feeling is so important for them to have a closure. We stop, school's ended, we go into our summer, and then we go back into school. It's the old routine. It's the most normalized routine that they have had for, depending how many years in school, but that's what they've known. So regardless what you think with that, or the kids think, or parents think, or whoever, if we're looking from learning and getting back that muscle memory and that sense of, oh yeah, I remember this, it's been a good thing. Trying to have as much, routine as you can throughout their days is important. And it doesn't have to be a routine of a rigid routine. It's just something to give them somewhat of a schedule. They have gone through a year with schedules all over the place, some not even having a schedule. Many of us have been like that. But even for the next, few weeks or the summer, is trying to say, okay, what's our days going to look like? And having something set a little bit will help get them back on track. I know that there was a question about children that have been home and many I know have done e-learning, have just decided to do that. And when you had to make that choice, and getting some of those kids back into the environment and society and socializing, there's many that have a lot of anxiety. And as parents and people supporting the children, I think you have to, one, talk about and show them through your own actions that I know it's hard, validate those feelings. I felt a lot of anxiety going back to work, or the first time I went into a store. Getting together with friends again seems so odd. So validate how, yeah, it's kind of uncomfortable. Start small, make those challenges. Challenge for, you know what, let's just try this. Let's do this together. How about calling a friend and just seeing if they want to come over and hang out in the backyard? So trying to validate their fears. And then I always look and I'll ask kids, is that reasonable or unreasonable? Is that realistic or unrealistic? Let's look at the data. What does the data show? Is that really going to happen? Because many kids, people in general, will write the end of the story. We don't know the end of the story. We know the here and now and present. And we know there's no data to support in many times what their biggest fear is. So listen to what their biggest fear is and then say, okay, what supports that? Has that occurred? And there are unfortunately some kids that I've had to say, yeah, the worst nightmare has come true. So it's hard to say, oh, that's not going to happen. But what's our plan then? Many times, someone with anxiety or struggling, if you have, I call it the escape plan. Let's go through your worst case scenario and let's come up with a plan. If that would happen, how would we then handle it? Or how could you leave that situation? Or how could we move forward, whatever it is? And probably, I'd like to say 99% of the time, that's being a little generous, but I would say at least 95% of the time, someone with anxiety, if they have a plan knowing that they could get out of this and escape if they get too uncomfortable, will not use the plan. The safety and security of knowing there is a plan is what they need. The safety and security of knowing they have the support of someone helping them through that is what they need. So I'm not sure if we have any other questions. That's about all the information I have.
Right. No, that was amazing. Thanks so much, Pam. The feedback, people are just saying that this is great. They appreciate it. No questions so far, but we can leave it open for a couple of minutes if you have any questions for Dr.
Absolutely.
Pam. Bayer, just go ahead and drop them in the chat. And we can hang out to help answer those questions. I don't know if you probably can't hear it on my end, but I can hear the thunder on your end. So
I can.
we know that the storm is coming. So, but again, just thank you so much. I think that it's really helpful to hear the developmental perspective and how it is impacting our kids so differently than what a traditional trajectory looks like in development. And I think that it's great for you to share your experiences and kind of your testimonials from practice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So just another comment that the individual has sat in most of her child's appointments and due to trauma, and they've learned so much wonderful things from you personally. So just very thankful for the opportunity. All right. Well, thank you so much. Oh, I think I have one more question. Hang on.
Okay.
All or nothing thinking. Can you discuss that and when it changes to allowing gray areas?
So that kind of goes along with the writing the end of the story. And I've noticed this more and more over the last, I'm going to say the last 20 years, and it gets into another whole subject of being able to delay gratification. And there's been such a change in our youth over the years and children just being able to delay that and not go that all or none. It's either everything's happy and good or it's all bad. And there is no middle ground. And so that's where a lot of times asking them, I use the concept of big deal, little deal. Big deal is it is going to change your life and you've got to come up with a solution. A little deal is it feels as uncomfortable as a big deal, but how is it going to change your life? Or asking the questions for them to explain more to you. You know, when it's all or none, what is the data to show that? Are there other options? You really want to work with perspective taking. And that is a hard thing that I see with even adolescents, that, you know, children, you're like, okay, they're a little more black and white. But you've seen it with adolescents, and a lot of that is that anxiety, and it's going to that fight or flight is kind of that all or none. So one, reducing down the anxiety is a great way to start with that. And just, okay, I realize that this is causing you a lot of emotions, or this makes you really uncomfortable. I got to take a break. You know, let's come back to that. Let's try to look at options. A lot of times, if you throw out the options or you keep it consistent and say, I know you're angry, but I can't bend on this right now. We can look at a compromise. Well, no, there's no compromise. I can't do this. On and on and on. Walking away from the situations, once that anxiety and those emotions go down some, most often your child or adolescent will come back and be like, okay, fine. You know, I can look at this, or, you know, I can't look at that, but how about this? And so you try to work with them on that problem solving and coming up with a cooperative plan. Some things are just a hard no. And you just have to validate and say, I know it stinks. And someday you'll get to make all those choices yourself. But try to look at what's the end of the story. A lot of times the none tends to be pretty extreme of what's going to happen if they don't get to do this. You know, and again, consider it's important to them. It's maybe not in our eyes that big a deal, but to them it's very important. So say, why is this so important to you?
Thank you. So I'm not seeing any other questions come through at this time. So we are past our 7 o'clock time frame, but again, thank you everybody for being so patient with, you know, starting a little bit past the beginning at 6 o'clock, but we're so thankful for you to come on again, Pam, and share.
Well, thank you.
And talk
And
through this.
I will get better with the technology over time. But thank you, everybody.
We'll keep making you practice. We'll make you practice. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.